Hello, I'm Joe,
And TJ?
and we are the Schoolhouse 302. We are thrilled today to bring you Neil Gupta from our Review and Reflect series. Neil is the director of secondary education. We're thrilled to have him on this Review and Reflect, where we're going to dive deep into what we've covered throughout the last 4 weeks, which is an incredible topic, often misunderstood. People use the word all the time, and that is trust. So with that, let me turn it over to TJ. TJ?
Yeah, we're extremely happy that Neil could make it to the show to talk about trust. And Neil, we wanted to open up to see what you thought about that initial blog post that we put out there about trust, our 7 ways of trust for school leaders. You're as a school leader yourself, and what did you take away from that?
Wow, there was so much jam packed in there. I'll tell you that I wish I would have as a school leader, and I don't care where you are in your leadership journey. I don't care what your title is. I don't care what you're dealing with right now. I go back to the curriculum around leadership in administration, at least, all delved around nuts and bolts type things, and I just appreciate that. We come back to this notion that we don't sometimes step in the mud over things that on a process part. It's things like this. It's a culture building part, and the idea of trust and actually spending time to delve into it and to think about that. In some situations, I was able to pause and read it and think reflectively on where I made those mistakes. And in some instances, I was able to look ahead to say it's an affirmation. I love that it wasn't just here's 2 aspects of trust. You went into 7 of them, and it kind of felt complete to me. I felt like well, what's the third and fourth going to be after the first 2? And as you kept going through it, I love that you talked about nuances. And again, I reflected on. I wish I would have had this years and years ago in my arsenal to kind of think about my leadership journey.
Yeah, we fully appreciate that, Neil. It's funny you say about the complexity of it. We struggle with that as leaders, as authors, as writers and thinkers. How do we approach some of this, and do we just put out a bulleted list? But as we live in very complicated times. And we always try to break the complex into parts where it's not complicated, that we can take some of the mystery out of these things. And trust is something that we've experienced. It's so hard to gain and so easy to lose. I mean, that is just a fact. I mean, so if you make that mistake, especially I feel like in these times with COVID, even what we see around social justice issues, a misstep can be incredibly costly.
Absolutely. And I think that, in any situation, and you referenced this in the blog, was that, people are willing to give each other permission in the respect of, uncharted territories with COVID or other initiatives that are going to happen. But things like trust, if you've got strong trust prior to the initiative, people will be willing to give grace and leniency on how things happen. And sometimes trust is broken. And you talked about that, like how sometimes quickly we come back into the relationship, and you kept using the word restore. How often we come back to say, I made a mistake. That was on me that I did that. And when people own it, I think, again, it takes time. Just like you said, Joe, it takes time to rebuild that sort of thing. We can't excuse that. But at the same time, we have to be in a place that we are in a place to be vulnerable to say, that's where I did make a mistake. And then we go from there.
Yeah, and if you're a human being, in the last 6 to 8 months, you've probably made a mistake, right? So because of that restoration with trust, I do feel like this has been a period of bonding where people have come together and have broken but also restored. And every time we break that and restore it, break it and restore it, it does get stronger. So hopefully that's been a good thing for a lot of teams. I know it has been for mine at work and even family at home. We've become stronger through this period, but it really does hinge on trust, right? And what you said is, you have to admit I made a mistake. There's candor in praise. There's candor in admitting that you've done something wrong. And that direct conversation really does help to build that bond.
Yeah. I look back at, you know, in the middle of the summer, and COVID is just a good example. I mean, once COVID is over, there'll be the next thing. Hopefully it's nothing that's grandiose and global like this, but, we all have things to kind of look at. But for me, a sticking point of where leadership comes out and the idea of trust came out was in how we responded, at least in our district, to COVID. I remember talking with my counterparts and other district leaders in other districts on a weekly basis. And we would all say, we have this issue. And then a week later, we'll come back and kind of like regroup and see where you are. And we'd come back and say, we solved something. Whereas we found out that other teams and other districts weren't in that same situation. What we came to find out was you also can't build, like if there are skeletons in the closet, like it's never too late to address them. But how we responded and how we moved quickly through the process happened 4 years ago. It didn't happen this summer. But you think about the foundation of trust is built, all the time. You talked about that in your blog about how, trust is almost never static. And I love that, because sometimes we think about that as leaders and we say, maybe if I'm coming to a new school district or a new building, or I'm going into a new job, and I say my job in the first week is to build trust. In the classroom, my first week is to build trust. And then we sometimes think we have to just check the box and move on, and we've built it and it's done, versus stepping back and saying, we've got to look at it on a constant basis.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's not static, right? It's either moving in one direction or the other. And so if you're not working on it consistently, it's going to move in the wrong direction. That's the thing to remember. If you're not working on it, it's going to move in the wrong direction. In the absence of proper communication, the void is filled with negativity. And so using that as a basis of our next part of our conversation, Neil, we need to grow in our ability to have the skill of trust. And so we always recommend 3 books for our readers. We know you watched that Read This series. What did you think of that? Were there any of those books that resonated with you? Have you read any of those?
So no, I didn't get a chance to read them. But your video definitely piqued my interest in all 3 of them, and kind of hit the sweet spot of, I think how you summarized, at least, or picked pieces of them, not summarized, but picked pieces of them, definitely, piqued my interest. I can tell you that from that motion leadership, when you talked about this idea of lack of trust is due to fear, I think about that aspect of like, it's due to lack of confidence. I could look back and say, when I didn't do my job as a leader, preparing for the meeting and trying to think I could wing it, you think you can do that, and then you walk in the room and all you're doing is fooling yourself, because everybody saw right through that. And, I look about that as far as, I've got to think about building trust means that I've got to build myself first. My anchor would be my literacy game. I was a high school math teacher before going into administration, and I was a curriculum director, and I tried to fake a literacy background. And yes, everybody has to grow in it, but you can't fake it. And now you can read, and you have to read, and you have to go, and you have to, like, you got to put the time in, but you can't sit with a bunch of language arts teachers and try to fake it, sort of thing. They'll give me grace to let me, know that I came from a math background, but I can't say that for the first couple years or months or something in that role, was I really actually willing to be vulnerable to say, even to myself, this is something I need to learn. And I tried to walk in there and try to use the terminology, but didn't really, go into a depth mode, and it came out. And so the confidence level and that fear level that you think you're maybe hiding gets exposed.
No doubt. That's a great point. I think you'll find too, Neil, once you dive in, especially to the speed of trust, because that's a great example that we're often in education put in positions that we may not be the expert. And the reality is that's perfectly fine. The skill set that you brought as a curriculum director to drive change, to support, to sustain for the betterment of students, that's the skill set that's really needed. The speed of trust gets into that, but how you present yourself to those English teachers, how you present yourself to the committee, how you orchestrate the meeting, then speeds everything up. They're not worried about your expertise. They know you're going to handle it, that you trust them. And there's that beneficial relationship back and forth, that you're the vehicle to drive the change. They're the ones informing the change. And Covey just does truly a masterful job of navigating that. And really glad to hear you mention that you were piqued by the Fullan work. I mean, everybody's a fan of Michael Fullan. I've never heard of anybody say different. That being said, that book, I don't know how popular that book is, and it's nice and tiny. I hate to say it, but it's nice and tiny, and it's explicit on how you can manage change in an ever-changing environment. So yeah, I mean, he's a golden ticket whenever you read him. But glad to hear you say that kind of pin dropped, and you're going to look into it further.
Yeah, when you talked about Stephen Covey, you know, and you talked about this in the video of like his behavior number 8, the confront reality. I'll tell you what, again, I think about early, and obviously I'm not saying I've arrived. Please, I'm not going there, but I can say early in my career, I thought trust meant like, you know, not trust, but this idea of manipulation. Like I'd walk into meetings and I knew the negatives. I knew the negatives on the list. I knew the pros on the list, but I only shared the pros. And I walked in and said, hey guys, we want to make this change because of this, this, and this. And, you know, the elephant was in the room. And I think it hurt trust that I wouldn't walk in and say, look, I know that this is going to be difficult. I know that there's going to be some, you know, anxiety about this. I may know, and I know it may fail. I know that there's going to be, you know, the tactical parts of the negative part. But because I was not willing to walk in and confront the reality of there are negatives to all decisions, sort of thing, there are going to be some negatives to it. You know, I think that eroded trust also. And so, you know, talking through that, I think is important in a leadership journey. Again, that vulnerability, but just that transparency to say, look, guys, this is difficult. I don't even want to go through this, you know, myself. Sometimes I think does help build that trust. We were going through an initiative once, and I was trying to sell it to all of them. And, you know, that was producing some anxiety in the room because my affect was so gung ho for it. And at one of the breaks, they said, do you really like this, that this is going to happen? I said, no. And they said, why didn't you tell us that? Like, why couldn't you just tell us that you're having anxieties and fears about that too? And we switched the afternoon to have a more open and honest dialogue, which actually helped all of us to breathe easier, including me.
Yeah. And so that was a critical point for me too, that Covey made in the podcast interview that we did with him, because I think what you're talking about there is confidence. And really that is the first part of trust, which is self-trust, right? And so you have to be trusting of yourself. And that, you know, means that we get real vulnerable and sometimes in front of large groups of people. It's so hard to do. It's why I need to remind myself of those 13 high trust behaviors and continue to read about trust and build trust, because I'm mostly building trust first with myself, right? The confidence that I need to not be the expert, right? That's the point. It's the confidence to not have that knee-jerk reaction to kind of try to take charge all the time.
Yeah.
We know you listened to the podcast. What did you get from that? That was a pleasure to do.
So you mean with Stephen Covey?
Yeah, with Covey.
You know, I think it was just the insight that he had. I think that, you know, we talk about the idea of completeness, that you know, we tend to think about it from just one angle. And, you know, I think we kid ourselves on it, but we take a complex issue about it and, you know, start to kind of internalize where in your, and again, it could be, if you're watching this and it's your first year in education, you could still go back to, you know, maybe something that happened on the sports field in the college and high school around your family, and be able to say, gosh, here's areas where I messed things up. But I think that internalization about that is important. I think, you know, kind of going through that. And I think that how he kind of unpacked it, I thought was perfect. I mean, it's also, come on, he's Stephen Covey. I'll be honest with you. When TJ, when you said like, hey, we're going to be like interviewing him, I was just like, what? Like, this is awesome.
Yeah, there's some times I talked to TJ afterwards where he kept it at like 30,000 feet, and then suddenly, like, not like landed the plane, it was more like a helicopter, like he just dropped and said, this is where you land. And I actually really like that because relationships are dynamic, the situations we're in are dynamic, there's a lot of variables, but at the end of the day, there are just a couple things though that you have to focus on, despite how dynamic all of it is. And I know TJ was probably taken back by the same thing. His energy level and enthusiasm was fantastic. And that's not something you can fake.
No.
It definitely was genuine. And I really love the fact that he's been able to build so much around this one concept, and really you change so many lives by dogging this issue. And it's still something, just look at, not to get political, but we can say the face of education, the face of America, the face of politics, there's just a lot of distrust out there. So the more we can focus on trust, the better.
Well, I mean, and just like TJ, you said, like, we're always building trust. I mean, trust is always, it's not static. We're either building it or we're destroying trust, and it's this tension that's happening. And as leaders, we think about that from a culture standpoint, right? Like, just like I gave the example of an initiative that I was working on, while the task may be that I'm working on the initiative and I've got an agenda in front of me and we're trying to, take care of an issue that's happening, we also as leaders have to be cognizant of I'm also there, the hidden curriculum sort of thing. The hidden agenda is, am I building trust and am I building culture, or am I hindering it? Like, so if I walk into the meeting, I could walk out probably making everybody go into the decision that I have, but I've eroded trust by that, and I've broken culture, versus walking in and so Stephen Covey, that complexity that he has shows the depth of, in a leadership journey. If we're not thinking about every aspect of things that we do, a phone call that we take, an email that we respond to, an interaction, not just the formal meetings, but an interaction in the hallway or even in the grocery store, are all built on an opportunity to either build it or destroy it. And if we think of it as I'm just answering a question, that's not going to work. It's gotten to the point where, and I think it's due to COVID, I think it's due to stress levels. And I just coached somebody yesterday that, like, and somebody sent an email to a person. The response back was emotional, and then the person responded back with a draft email of trying to rationalize the decision. And they said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Pick up the phone. That's what I think. Don't email back, because the person's in emotion right now. It doesn't matter that you were right. It doesn't matter what your 5-step points are. You're going to make the person probably more frustrated. Pick up the phone." And we have to be in that place, I think, to do that more.
Yeah, it's totally true. And that is the connection that we need. We're all behind these screens. And so we tend to be behind our phone or behind the computer. And so therefore we respond that way versus taking a deep breath, making a phone call, understanding that somebody's initial response is usually emotional, rationalizing irrational behavior is not rational. So, it is true. Neil, this has been a real pleasure. I think it's a place where, Joe's analogy, land in the plane, we might be able to land the plane there on culture, right? Because what you said is so true. We're building culture every day. Is there any final words that you'd like to say? 2 things. Is there any final words you'd like to say? And where can we find more about you and the work that you're doing?
Sure. It was Stephen Covey, kind of, I think, drilled it in, this idea. And then it was also in your blog. For me, it pounded home this idea of trust requires action. Like, and what does that mean when it requires action? It means having a conversation about the process. You can't just ninja trust on somebody, and you can't also walk away and say, well, I think, or I believe I've done a good job of building trust. I think that there have to be those moments where you actually sit down and set aside explicit time. Doesn't have to be a full separate meeting, but time just to say, how are we doing as a team and how are we processing together? And I'll tell you, like, for me, I think about, if I'm not having dissonance in the room, then they're having it in the parking lot. And so like, it's so funny because I'm starting out, you have to read the faces and you have to kind of see where things are. And if there's silence, that's when there's a problem. And so I'll say, guys, like, please, it's not my title. It's not, it's not being polite sort of thing. Cause I know you're going to do that over there. So might as well do it in here. And then all of a sudden they go, okay. Like the first person goes, okay, well, I think your idea is wrong. And it's like, and your response is, your immediate response is important. Like, okay, thanks for sharing. Like, it can't be that you have to watch your body language. You have to watch kind of how you respond, or, sorts of things. But those things matter. So I think that trust requires action drilled at home for me. How are you doing that? As far as kind of where you can find me, I've got a website, and it's www.farthertogether.org. And, it comes from an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's been kind of like a life journey, I guess, quote for me of where I've failed and where I see success happening. When we go farther, there's that conversation of better together, and I would say farther together.
That's a great place to end. Farther together, building trust. You can't ninja trust in the room. You need the dissonance there rather than the parking lot. I love that, Neil. That's going to be something I take away from this for sure. Thanks for being on Review and Reflect. We reviewed the content from this month, all on trust. You can find that at theschoolhouse302.com. We hope people go there to read that blog, to check out the books, and to also get that great podcast with Stephen Covey. Neil, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you.